Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for being here, Dr. Mo and Kimberly. I'm intensely interested in your conversation. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Earlier, you made a comment that it should be, you intimated maybe or made a comment that it should be used medicinally, but not other ways. Did I hear that wrong? In other words, well, let me just ask you before I don't want to back you into I'm not trying to back you into a corner. I wanted to ask you about that because it seems like you have expertise, and I've been hearing a lot about the medical benefits of cannabis from friends and physicians. And you made the comment around you cannot overdose from cannabis. Can you be medically impaired in a way that could have an impact on on your safety, even if you're not overdosed in a respiratory loss of respirations or
I was speaking to death alone.
Pardon
me?
So
I just was speaking to death, that it doesn't cause death in that particular slide.
Well, I didn't know that, so that's good to know.
Yeah. And so to answer your original question, I mean, I have a lot of opinions. I'm a mother as well. I have 20-somethings, so this is actually something I'm more intimately familiar with at this time, and they attend UC Santa Cruz, so I'll leave it at that.
Oh.
But I will speak to that. Actually, I had conducted a podcast for a period of time, and I did a podcast that was entitled Harm Reduction. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples. The key is that young people are going to do things that they're going to do. And I feel on the spectrum of other things that teens are going to do, like alcohol and benzodiazepine pills. These kids have these parties where they just dump pills in bowls and they just take things that they don't even know what they are. There's all kinds of different things that kids are doing out there. And on that spectrum, I personally, as a medical physician who have treated teens and 20-somethings and all the way up, that cannabis on that spectrum is much, much lower harm than any of those other things that are out there that kids are getting into. So am I a proponent of recreational use? I'm not going to say that I am, but I will also say that I have teenagers who come to me and are open to me and tell me about their use, and that makes me feel good because I know they're going to use it, and I can give them ideas of that they need to curtail their use and how it could affect them, and that if they start losing motivation and different things like that, that they need to watch, just like they need to watch their calories from McDonald's and things like that.
So I could conclude that you're not really a proponent for recreational use. You're really a proponent for medical use. And that
I'm here to speak as a proponent for medical use.
Yeah, and I wonder, so mental impairment, I want to go back to that. Would you say it can mentally impair a person if they use too much, like if they use it and then go drive? Would you say if they use it, they shouldn't be able to drive? Or the policy framework should address
There actually
that?
are some studies of people using various amounts of THC and doing driving tests, and I don't have them on the tip of my fingers, but it is much less than alcohol. And the thing that stands in the way is the ability to test and know impairment, and there's a humongous spectrum of who's using it and how much and how often and how it can potentially in the moment impair you or not.
So I can answer a few of your questions also from my perspective. So Proposition 64 collects a great deal of tax, millions, billions of dollars, and a great portion of that does go to the CHP. They are currently actively doing research. I've actually presented at the CHP before also, doing research to come up with tests that test impairment. So there is one cannabinoid that you've heard of the most, THC, and THC attaches to the CB1 receptor in the brain, which causes mood elevation. And just like any other mood elevators, if you take too much, right? So you're depressed, you're down here. You take your mood elevator in the correct amount and you feel normal. You can take too much of any mood elevator and you will feel high, which can cause sleepiness, dizziness, and impairment to not drive. So that is a negative side effect associated with taking too much THC. Depending upon the administrative technique, that impairment will last a different amount of time. Currently, there's a problem though because cannabinoids stay in the body for a long time. So there's two things going on here. They stay in the body up to 30 days. So you can test positive for cannabis but not be impaired, right? I am using a lot of cannabis right now for different symptoms, but I'm obviously not impaired, right? So taken in the correct amount, just like other medicines, it can actually reduce impairment. So there's patients who are suffering from seizures, chronic pain, depression, who are more dangerous to drive without their medication than they are with the correct amount of medication. So those are two important things to remember. And then also just remember, we are looking forward to the day that we do have the test from the CHP, because we don't want anybody, we are mothers once again, we don't want anybody driving while impaired, whether that means pharmaceuticals, alcohol, texting, eating, whatever you're doing, right? That's definitely something we're against. And to talk to the question about medical use versus recreational or adult use. So first of all, I am a medical proponent. I've been studying, I was pre-med prior to studying psychology and social justice. I changed my major to become an advocate for medical cannabis once I found out about the repression of medical cannabis when I was in college and studied a variety of natural medicines the last 20 years. And I wouldn't have dedicated my entire life to helping people, have fun on Friday night, right?
Right.
But
no, and I totally
yeah.
understand. I'm beginning
Yeah.
to learn about
Yeah.
natural and functional medicine and versus allopathic and the
Yeah.
differences. And it's stunning what
It
we
is.
didn't know.
And but there's one flip side, is that when patients come to us, or members as we call them now, a lot of them are coming to us, even though they don't have a recommendation, they're still using it for medical reasons, whether it's mood elevation, anxiety relief, sleep, stimulating their appetite, or pain, right? And then when it comes to harm reduction, like Dr. Mo said, we see a lot of patients who are really trying to stop drinking alcohol, because alcohol does negatively affect the kidneys, liver, and other organ systems that cannabis does not, right? Cannabis is a non-toxic alternative to alcohol. So even though someone is using cannabis as an adult and is using it recreationally, it still is healthier and safer than the alternatives.
Would you say that this is my last question? That cannabis is compounding. You said it stays in the body for 30 days. So is there a compounding impact or?
So the metabolites stay in the body, but the active effects of the cannabis wear off. So the effects wear off, but the metabolites and the cannabinoids, you would still, if you had a test, if someone used cannabis 30 days ago, the effects might only last for an hour if they smoked a joint. But 30 days later, they might still test positive for cannabis because the metabolites are in the system, and that's what's being tested currently, because we need to find a new test.
Do the metabolites have a negative impact as they build up in the body if someone just keeps using it for like a year or two?
No, it basically is just like the endocannabinoids. I mean, they're very similar molecular structure. They act on the same system in the same way. And so that's like, someone who runs every day, they have high levels of endocannabinoids. They typically need less phyto or plant cannabinoids if they are using cannabis, but we haven't found any research that shows that using cannabis over time is building up or causing a negative long-term effect. The effects of impairment are short-term.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
This made me think of 3 just separate things that I just wanted to touch on.
Okay, sure.
One, that when people are describing their recreational use, I often think that they are self-medicating, which tends to be something that a lot of people that get into use of medicinal substances and go down the wrong path, they are self-medicating and then they go down the wrong path. So it's really hard to differentiate that. And that's where when I have parents bring their teens to me and they want me to present to them how to use things potentially properly, and so they don't get in trouble and they don't get impaired and they still can go to school and get their stuff done, even though they have paralyzing anxiety, which a lot has come out with the isolation of the last couple of years. So people are self-medicating. So it's hard to kind of differentiate those 2 things. The second thing is I like to speak to the effect of cannabis and the speaking of addiction. So cannabis, in the same way, it doesn't lead to physiologic death. It also doesn't lead to physiologic addiction. So like when people say I have a high tolerance, that's not exactly medically accurate. And there are no places in the world that are doing medical cannabis detoxification. Like when you have to go for alcoholism, you go into detox and then you go into a facility to get over your addiction. You don't need a physiologic detoxification of cannabis. You just potentially have an addiction in the same way people are addicted to video games or online shopping. So it builds dopamine and endorphins and other biochemicals in your body that you get from using the substance.
It is an addiction, but not in the
sharing,
same way.
It's not a physical. So it's not a receptor that a thing binds to, and then multiple more receptors need it to bind to it, and then you withdraw because now you have all these open receptors and you no longer have the drug. Then you need to downregulate the receptors. That's detox. So people detoxing off alcohol and benzodiazepines can die as they're going through a withdrawal. I've witnessed and treated people through that process. I've never, and it doesn't happen because there isn't the same physiological buildup of receptors for the medicine to bind to, because they're natural receptors that are there anyway that are collecting your natural cannabinoids that are there. So that same process doesn't happen, so you don't have a physical addiction. You have addiction because there's all kinds of addictions we know of that people have to go into rehabilitation facilities, but they don't go through detox. I hope I'm saying that.
Yeah, you said it really well. I'm wondering about what we've heard about those teenagers between the age of 18 and 25 who have a propensity to flip into a psychosis with the strong THC, I think that's called, of today's marijuana. Could you please speak to that, or do you?
Yeah, absolutely. So what that stems from is high levels of THC. And THC has negative side effects associated with it, which when you use too much, it can cause anxiety and temporary mental impairment, right, for not driving, trouble with speech, trouble with balance, all those things that go into it. And so that is temporary. It is unfortunate, and it is something that we need to talk to our children about. Alcohol, cannabis, and every drug out there. I'm not looking forward to the teenage years. That's not going to be fine, but we need to talk about it, and we need to focus on education. We also need to talk about the fact that 10% of the population does have a psychologically addictive personality and can be easily addicted to a number of things. And these are all conversations that we need to have so that our children are aware. The only, the good news and why I am a proponent is it's not killing our children, right? Like Dr. Mo said, alcohol is killing them. Pharmaceutical parties are killing them. At least the cannabis isn't killing them, but I'm not saying that they should be using it. I'm just saying, worst case scenario, if my child decided to go down that path and experiment with something, I want to see them the next day, right? I want to be able to have that conversation about why you shouldn't have done that. And so that is a possibility with cannabis, but we're not proponents of children using cannabis unless they have a serious illness or disorder that it's treating them, and that pharmaceuticals were more harmful to them than cannabis was.
Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Serna.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate the answers